and welcome to the Real Talk conversation with our super special guest today. Patrick, I'd love if you could introduce yourself for our wonderful community.
Yeah. So, Jamie, thank you so much for having me on. My name is Patrick McAndrew, and I am an actor, podcast producer. I like to call myself a tech philosopher as well. So, I've been working as an actor for many years now, and was really, I will probably get into this a little bit more, but it was really through that work that I discovered the digital wellness world. And, in addition to that, I work as a podcast producer, producing my own podcast, but then also helping entrepreneurs and small business owners launch and start their own podcasts as well. And then for a while now, I've been very interested in essentially tech's influence on society, how it really affects our relationships, our relationship to the world as well. So I've been a member of the digital wellness community for, I guess it's almost 3 years, is really since the organization began, and it's been great to connect with fellow collaborators like yourself, Jamie, who are doing some amazing work in the digital wellness space. So thank you so much for having me on the show. Happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm so glad that we can continue this ever evolving dialogue. I know that last February is when we first met in real life, when that was still a safe thing
Yes,
for
yes.
everyone to do.
Right, right. Yeah, it's wild just like how much has changed in the world since then. But hopefully, the later half of this year we'll be able to do things like that again. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's just a literal demonstration of how we're evolving and adapting with our technology, but also our ever evolving relationships. And I'd love if you could share a little bit about what inspired you to start the Relate podcast and the mission behind it, because it really touches my heart.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, kind of going back a couple of years when I was really first starting to get to know the digital wellness community and the tech community. At the time, what I was doing was I had a blog called the Low Tech Trek, and it was kind of an organization in a lot of ways as well, because I would coach individuals on how to improve their communication and listening skills in the workplace, kind of with the caveat that we're doing this in an age of technology where we're all often consumed by the online world and our screens. And as I got to meet a lot of people in the digital wellness world, I had the opportunity to meet some amazing people like yourself who are coaches, who are speakers, really educating people on how to go about practicing digital wellness and just having a more mindful relationship with how we use technology. And so I began just thinking about, okay, we have all these great people doing all this great work. What am I bringing that's different to the table? What is going to be authentically me in this digital wellness space? I guess I was really starting to think about, okay, what is my place in the digital wellness world? And as I mentioned before, I got into this digital wellness space through performing as an actor. And once I had performed a show that was essentially about uh, humans or technology's impact on human relationships, and went really well. And but then after that show, I kind of separated both worlds. I kind of compartmentalized. And so after I kind of started thinking about, okay, what's my place in this digital wellness world, I really began to realize that, okay, I need to embrace this actor, performer, artist side of me in the digital wellness space, as opposed to keeping these two things separate. So that was a big reason why I created the podcast. The podcast was a means, I guess, on my side of things, a means to talk about digital wellness, to talk about the importance, specifically about the importance of deep and meaningful human connection and humanity in the age of technology that we're living in. And so I not only wanted to do that and talk about those things, but I also wanted to highlight the work of all the people that I had met thus far on the podcast as well. I think that the digital wellness space is still so new. And so a big reason why I started the show as well was to, I guess, find a new medium to talk about these things, to really broadcast the work, the great work that all these people are doing. So that was really why I had created it. And I think that now more than ever, just because everyone is spending so much time online, the importance of building meaningful relationships and really getting to the core of what our humanity is and what it means is so important today, because I think it's so easy to lose ourselves in our screens.
It's so important. And I'm curious how this is intertwined with your tech philosophy that you were starting to touch upon.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this kind of goes back to what I was talking about before with regards to trying to figure out my place in this digital wellness world. I had, as I mentioned before, had done some coaching, had done some speaking as well. But really what I was trying to figure out was, okay, what is like, as I mentioned before, authentically me, and what is going to add another dimension to this digital wellness space. And so I came up with the term tech philosopher because what my work has really transitioned into doing is taking all of this research that I have been doing in the digital wellness space, all the books I've read, all the articles I've done, as many of us do in the digital wellness world, and channel them into specific creative projects that I'm in the process of developing, not quite ready to announce to the world yet, but stay tuned. And so I don't at that time I felt that, like, when I started using this term, that I felt like it encompassed more of what I was doing, was that I was reading and researching about these topics and thinking about them in my head as a way, okay, how can I effectively communicate this to people in order to make it something that people care about? And at that point, like, I wasn't really coaching as much. I wasn't really speaking with clients directly like I had been. So I didn't really want to call myself a digital wellness coach, because that wasn't, my work had transitioned so much so that I wasn't doing that as much anymore. But I was still, and still am, very much in this digital wellness and tech space. So I felt like the title tech philosopher encompasses more of kind of the work that I'm doing now.
It's also very intriguing, and I'd like to dive into some of those tech philosophies because I feel like there's this whole spectrum of tech wellness and digital flourishing is in the middle. So it's something we can strive to have that equilibrium. But in terms of tech philosophy, is there anything that really sparks your interest and creativity that you feel really passionate about?
I think that one of the biggest things is to just be aware that technology is going to continue to advance, and for better or worse too. Like, there's a lot of positives that come with advancing technologies, a long list of positives. But there's also a flip side to that coin, some potential negatives as well. And it's just important as a collective society that we are aware of these things. And so I guess my biggest philosophy would be to really just make the general public aware of what, how they're interacting with technology, how it's affecting them in their lives, and also to be able to keep in mind to use technology as a tool as opposed to it being your master. I think that a lot of people fall into the habits of just being so reliant on what's happening in the online world, so controlled by their email or by social media, that it essentially controls their entire day, then their week, their month, their year, and they don't have a firm grasp of who they are as an individual. And I think this, to me, is what digital wellness is all about, is really figuring out who you are as a person, so that you can then bring your best foot forward in the relationships that you have, and to not let technology essentially control who you are and your actions. And so I guess with regards to like philosophies, if we're, kind of broadening the scope, I would say the biggest thing is just awareness, because as technology continues to advance, it's going to become easier and easier for us to fall into patterns that become almost subconscious in a lot of ways. And if we don't have that awareness, then it's going to be very easy to forget who we are and what's truly important in our lives. So yeah, so I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I think at the heart of it is just it's being aware.
I love it, and that's really what sparks the passion in me and the projects that we're doing with Meep. So I really appreciate the synergy, and awareness is absolutely that first step that, first we need to be aware and notice what's happening. And I feel like through education and all of the resources online, that's what's enabling us to share these tech philosophies for people to apply in their day-to-day lives.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think when to kind of go back to the conversation of like what I felt or started thinking about what my role was in the digital wellness world, I began to realize that my biggest strength was probably on the awareness side, to really to reach those initial people and then channel them into maybe like a lot of the work that you do or a lot of the work that other people in the collective do with regards to giving them tangible steps and concrete solutions and practices that they can implement in them and their families' lives, whether it's a certain app that they can use to monitor their screen time, whether it's certain practices or things that they're able to implement on a daily basis. um it has really been, for at least for me, it's been an exciting journey to kind of figure out, okay, what is this digital wellness world and what's my place in it.
I love it. And I feel like with that awareness piece, taking a step back even further, I'm hearing what is this world and what is my place in it? And I think that that's something that relates to all of us on this journey of exploration.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a much bigger question than, what's our relationship to technology. I think it's, how is technology disrupting our relationship to the world?
Now, this is some real philosophy.
Now we're getting so deep.
We're scuba diving. Do you have your gas tank?
Oh, yes, I know, I know. I didn't bring my snorkel with me, unfortunately.
Oh, I love the metaphors, but I really do appreciate it because technology is a tool and tools can be used to, tighten the screws or build a door, but tools can also be used to break down a door and do some really destructive things. So at what point are we checking in and having those safety conversations? And I mean, even reflecting back to traditional schooling, how it's like, oh, in, home ec or baking class, it's like, okay, make sure you use the oven mitt before you open the oven because you'll burn yourself. And there are these, introductory conversations that we have when we use typical traditional tools. And now we're in that time where all of these tools have just poof appeared. And this younger generation hasn't had the tutorials or the how to's. And I understand the learn by doing piece, but I do feel like there's a huge opportunity to have that instruction and like awareness of what might happen if you don't use these tools with intention.
Oh, absolutely. I cannot imagine being a preteen or a teenager right now and having all of these different apps and social media at my fingertips. I think that it becomes very dangerous territory when you don't have a solid foundation of who you are. And I mean, I'm still figuring out who I am. Like, I think it's always an ongoing process, but I do believe that as you get older, you start to develop a deeper understanding of who you are. So I can't imagine being someone who's really just, at that age trying to figure out who they are, and they have all these messages and photos and videos coming at them that paints a somewhat perfect, quote unquote, perfect picture of what they're supposed to be. And so, yeah, I can't imagine what it must be like. It's something that is, it's definitely a problem that we need to figure out how to navigate.
And that's what gives me such hope with our community of digital wellness innovators across the globe. And like you said, I mean, we're all still on that journey of exploration. And for those people that are using technology in this new capacity and are awakening to that awareness of the longer term impacts and that self discovery, this is like a shameless plug that we are here to support you and have those resources along the journey because whether it's the latest app or the latest voice technology that's supporting your flourishing on and offline, you're not alone. And I think that the biggest thing is we create our path with every step that we take. So, when we're looking online and seeing photos or stories or interviews of people we admire, that's awesome. And let's use it for inspiration, but that's not a cookie cutter mold because we're all unique snowflakes. So, I hope that our digital wellness collective around the globe can really continue sharing this awareness piece so people don't feel so alone.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, as I was mentioning before, the digital wellness world, it's still relatively new. And I think that over time, though, we're definitely going to see an increase in the people interested in, okay, what is this digital wellness thing? What's going on with this? Because I think digital wellness, as well as the movement to professionalize tech, to really make it into a process that requires professional certification to run the tech organizations. I think those two combined will really create a powerful. My hope is that it creates a powerful impact in the world that will really change the way in which we use technology, and as opposed to it just being this free for all that it is right now.
That's a great way to describe it. And I appreciate that we're able to articulate our intentions of what we hope to see in the future and that we're speaking it into being. Because, like you mentioned, this is a very new conversation. Although we've been talking about it the past 3 years, some people will be awakening to it over the next 3 years. So, in this time, I'm really excited that we are building that foundation with the Institute and organizations in the collective to have that structure for when people are ready, we have the resources.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Amazing. So I think it's so important to, now that we've done our scuba diving and imagined really high up into the cosmos, what are some concrete, actionable practices that support you in your day to day digital flourishing that we can share with our communities?
Oh, absolutely. I think for me personally, what is super effective is to not have your phone with you at the beginning part of the day when you're trying to get something specifically done. I think that when you don't have the phone there that could potentially interrupt what you're doing, it allows you to be so much more effective, so much more focused on what it is you're working on. And so that's like one of the biggest things. Also, going places without your phone too. I know that many of us aren't really going too many places right now because there's a pandemic. But even if it's just going outside for a walk or something like that, it allows you to get into the habit of not needing to always have your phone with you. I think that also when you're spending time with loved ones, family, friends, whatever it may be, to if you happen to be at like your home or a place that you're staying, to keep the phone in another room while you're hanging out with your family. I think it just allows that distraction to be away. It allows you to be much more present. And then once the world reopens again, if you're out and about with friends, to just give them your attention, to not have that phone out there. I think that more awareness, to kind of go back to awareness, more awareness is being spread, I think, as to the etiquette when it comes to phone use in front of people. I think that it's becoming very, 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 very slowly. I think it's becoming more commonplace for people not to have their phones out all of the time. And my hope is that that becomes more of a standard practice, that people really do see it as rude. Now, of course, I definitely understand there's situations where there's an emergency and you have to take a call, or maybe if like there's someone else who's coming to hang out with you, you want to check your phone to see where they're at, see if they'll be there in a couple minutes or something like that. I think that that's the exception to the rule. But if you're if you're having like a full on blown out like conversation on your phone through text message while you're spending time with people, that I don't think that should be allowed. And now, obviously, I'm not the one to say what's allowed and what's not allowed, but I think that it's important that we put restrictions on ourselves in some ways so as to then form these digital wellness habits. Yeah, I think that it will definitely lead to more happiness for yourself and more enriching relationships too. I think it's amazing just how much of a difference that makes. And it's a big reason why I got into this space in the first place, was just through observing my surroundings and seeing how often people were on their phones.
Yeah, enriching our relationships is something that is so critical, and it is that reflection of enriching that inner relationship, but also when we are with people, having that present energy exchange is so powerful. So when the phone comes into the picture, you're cutting it off. And what was so
Yeah.
powerful that will always be ingrained in my mind is this study with parents and kids, and it's like young babies with a parent, and when it's just them and the kid, they're so engaged, they're laughing, there's eye contact, it's seamless. And then as soon as the parent picks up the phone, the kid innately knows that their intention is distracted. So the reactions, are across the spectrum, but just seeing that and how that, yes, you could be like, "Oh, it's a child. Oh, there's always excuses and reasons," but I deeply feel to my core that our inner child is crying and screaming every time that that happens. And, as we
Oh yeah.
adult and, whatever, we can hold it back, but deep inside, it's like, upsetting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I definitely agree with you on that. And I agree too that it cuts off the conversation when someone brings out their phone. The conversation is going to stay surface level. Uh, I haven't had any interaction that a conversation has gone deep when someone is on their phone and fiddling on their phone. I just don't think that it's possible, because their attention is diverted elsewhere. And in order to have a deep and meaningful conversation, you need to be fully present.
Yeah, and there's 2 sides to this, so I'd like to address both of them. So, in moments where we might be that individual with the phone, some practices to help soften that energetic blow is announcing like, "Hey, I really wanna pay attention to our conversation. This is really valuable time for me. I just wanna make sure that, whoever's meeting or the delivery food or whatever, I'm just gonna check this text quickly and I'll be right back with this conversation, but like just give me a moment." And announcing what exactly we're doing helps that clear communication. So it's less of a harsh blow. Have you experienced that all in your personal practice?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have, which has been great. I think that it's something that I've tried to do in those situations where I do have to go on my phone. I'll explain like, "Hey, just so you know, this is what I'm doing." And other people have as well. And I think in those situations, it's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's totally cool. Like, go for it." And I think that sort of transparency is very helpful. And, I'm not saying that if someone is on their phone while they're hanging out with me, that they need to tell me every single thing that they're doing on their phone, but more so that I just know that you're interested in hanging out with me. You know what I mean? And because everyone's time is valuable to a certain extent, and I think that at the end of the day, it's important to be mindful with regards to how you're spending that time when you're getting together with somebody.
I appreciate that so deeply. And on that perspective of the other person that's not on their phone, I've been trying different things just to entertain myself and see what happens. So sometimes I'll be talking to someone, I see they're not engaged, and then I'll just change the topic and see if they even notice.
Yes. Oh, I've done things like that before as well. Oh, it's so bad too. It's like, oh my gosh. I like there'll be times where like I'm in the middle of like saying something, and then they'll whip out their phone, they'll be on their phone, and I'll just stop, and it's just like quiet, and then they get off their phone and they're like, so yeah, yeah, like, and it's like, oh, you weren't even listening. And yeah, I play those kind of games all the time too, that because yeah, it's just a way to like amuse ourselves. And I think I've done the one where like I've just completely changed the topic as well. It's like it's a great way to make a sad situation more humorous for sure.
I'm glad it's relatable and it's interesting social experiments that we can test in
Oh
real
yeah.
time.
Oh, absolutely. It's so funny, and like most of the times when that happens, they don't even notice.
It's like,
And
yeah, yeah,
that's like
exactly.
it's yeah, it's like it's really funny, but it's also like so sad. Uh but yeah, I mean, I guess it could be entertaining at moments.
Yeah, I feel like at this point, we need to be able to laugh about these things because it's just gonna become more prevalent. But I think the biggest thing is the silence. Like, I'm just gonna wait till you're done because, like you said, all of our time is valuable. I know you're, exchanging with that moment. I do have moments where I feel that tension of somebody's texting me, maybe it's a client, maybe it's something timely, and I wanna make sure that I'm engaged, but I'm so, pulled away by the technology, I might not have that disclaimer with who I am in person. So, I think it's important to have those communication charters on both ends. So the people that you're digitally communicating with, letting them know, "Hey, from these hours, I'm on my phone, you can reach me. After this time, it's going to be a delay. I might get back to you tomorrow." But also, when you're in person with people, it's like, "Hey, I know this is our family time, but I still have some clients I'm waiting to hear back on. You know, I might be have to pull away for a second." But something that has helped me is just walking into the other room because it's really hard, even if you're saying the disclaimer and you're like, "Hey, can I just answer this really quickly?" I feel like me not looking is cutting off that energy exchange, and it's like hard because like you're being pulled in too many different directions. So even just stepping into the other room, you're finished faster because you're able to be fully present with the task at hand, but it's definitely a fine balance.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I would agree with you on that too. That if ever I feel like I do need to go on my phone, I feel much more comfortable when I go in the other room because it's like I'm at least taking the space to to address something else as opposed to trying to share the space between two different things where my attention is diverted. And it's when talking about these sort of things that it makes me nostalgic of the times when you didn't always have a phone on you and when it was just a home phone at your house, and where when you would go out you would actually be out with the person instead of just physically out with them, but mentally or emotionally elsewhere through your screen. And so yeah, I would agree with you on that it's very helpful if for whatever reason I feel like I need to be on my phone to separate myself into another room or another area of the room and address that before going back to having my full attention with the people that I'm with.
I love it, and I'm glad that we can relate on some of these more nuanced things with technology because we're evolving as we go. So I'm sure next year when we have our recap and we're reflecting again, there's going to be something new that comes up.
Oh yeah,
Beautiful.
absolutely.
So from last February to now, what has been the biggest tech realization that you've had with your personal practice so far?
Oh wow, that's a good question. Big realization with tech thus far since last February.
From our Digital Wellness Collective New York City meetup. Shameless plug.
Whoa, I think that one of the biggest things is just how dependent everybody is on technology. I mean, technology in a lot of ways saved the day with regards to this pandemic because there's so many people, obviously, who lost work, but there were so many people who didn't have to lose their jobs because of technology. And so if we didn't realize how dependent we were on it before, we definitely have realized it now. And so much of our time, arguably most of our day, centers around technology, centers around email and work, and for a lot of people, social media as well. And so I think I was aware of this a year ago and 2 years ago, that how reliant we are on technology, but this year really kind of put that front and center in my life. And that now, in a lot of ways, if we're away from technology, most of the time we're not working. We're, maybe on vacation or taking a break from our work. But now I feel like pretty much all the work is done online. At least in my situation. There's a lot of people who I'm sure have jobs where it's not really required to be on tech, whether you're a carpenter or some other tradesman or a wide variety of different professions out there that don't require you to be on a screen. But even in those professions, you have to have some sort of compatibility with technology. It's still in there in some way. So yeah, I think that just this past year, technology is even more front and center than it was before.
Absolutely. And I do appreciate that technology has saved the day, but also it's bringing up how technology is distracting our days. And it's just such
Oh
an
yeah.
interesting dynamic. And I know we're going to continue evolving and growing through this, but I appreciate you bringing up trades where we don't expect technology to be there. And that was part of my main desire to go full into energy healing with Reiki and sound meditation, because from my previous perspective, it's like, oh, the grass is always greener. I was like, if I quit my corporate computer job, I can just be off the computer all the time. But there are those things where follow-up emails, website, all these little things that, are part of being present in our digital world, especially because everything is so virtual in the ways we connect. But I am so grateful and appreciative for those moments where I'm like, okay, we have a session now. The phone is going so far away. I'm not going to look at it. And it's interesting because in the beginning of tucking away my phone, I mean, even now, it's like whenever I'm having a conversation that we're like deep scuba diving like this, I always put my phone out of sight because of the mere presence of it being in our space is distracting. And when I used to tuck
Right.
away my phone, it's like the FOMO of I might miss a message or what have you. But just taking a step back and letting go of, needing to control our timeline and stuff like that, and trusting that when we're ready to receive the messages, they will come. It's so beautiful because I don't have my ringer on, but sometimes, well, for example, yesterday, I saw I got an incoming call and I just happened to see it at that moment when I wasn't near my phone. So I trust the timing. And once we like get take a step back of like the phantom phone ringing and like all that stuff. It's like we'll receive the
Yeah.
message when we're ready and when it's coming. So just like the full circle of everything is so interesting to reflect on.
But yeah, and I think that people soon realize that it's not the end of the world if you don't respond to a message or to a call or to a notification right away. I think that, practicing when you are going to not only receive messages, but when you're going to read messages as well. It puts a lot of the agency on you as opposed to feeling like you're being controlled by these external sources. So, yeah, I would absolutely agree with you on that. That I think if we are able to, and I don't know if this is the right term, but like exercise self control. I don't know if it's necessarily that. It might be to an extent, but to just have a specific time when we want to check things or when we want to check in with the online world, whether it be email or social media, whatever it may be. I think having that mindset is very helpful.
Absolutely. And I feel like our mindset is so powerful. And I'm curious what your tech philosophy is with your acting background and how, in a way, when we are performing online, how there's some connection with that inner actor.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I love that because there's kind of two sides to this acting world is that on social media, especially with regards to like influencer culture and things like that, what you're seeing online very rarely is authentic. There's this big movement nowadays that what you post online, like authenticity, be authentic, and all of that. And yes, to a certain degree, I think there is some truth in that. That obviously, I think some posts can be more authentic than others. But no matter what, you are always taking a photo or video with the idea in mind that you are sharing it with people. So because that, you're going to set it up a certain way, you're going to have it look a certain way, you're going to act a certain way because you in a lot of ways are performing for an audience of followers, friends, whoever it may be. So on that kind of acting side, everyone, as you mentioned, is sort of acting in a way on social media. I think that on social media, you're just getting a snapshot of who someone is. I think a lot of times it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking you know who somebody is just because you're following them on social media. You see all their pictures, you see their lifestyle, but that's it's not who they are. They could be someone completely different from what you're seeing. In a lot of ways, it's just an act. And so from an acting perspective, there's that side of things. Now, kind of how I got into this world, as I mentioned before, was through acting. So there's kind of another perspective on acting, which I am all about. And when I was studying to be an actor when I was in school, I would take these acting classes. We would do a wide variety of different exercises, primarily things that would exercise your listening, your awareness, your speech, your communication. And I remember being in class and being like, "Oh my gosh, like everybody should take these classes. Like, oh my gosh, people can learn so much from these skill sets." And at the time, I wasn't in the digital wellness world quite yet, so I wasn't quite sure how to channel that into digital wellness. But once I started to learn about digital wellness and mindful tech use and just observe how technology was changing the world, then I created a show, as I mentioned earlier, about this. It was a one-man show and it was all about technology's impact on our relationships and kind of explored that as a performer with my relationship with the audience. And so it was really fun. And I think that actor training to be an actor is training for humanity. It's training how to develop empathy, because when you're acting, you have to perform all sorts of different characters, many of whom might be completely different from who you are, while at the same time, they might have a little bit of who you are in there as well. So there's so much involved in learning to be an actor that is connected to and to the root of what humanity is. So I think that that sort of knowledge and that sort of element of storytelling is so critically important nowadays, where technology, as we've mentioned many times, is continuously progressing. It's getting more and more advanced, that now more than ever, I believe it's so important to engage with these stories. So I know that some might argue that part of the technological problem is things like Netflix and binge watching TV shows, which, like, I definitely get to a certain degree, like absolutely definitely understand that you don't want to be, sitting for 4 to 5 hours just watching the same TV show over and over. And I'm sure we're all guilty of that to a certain extent. But I think the engagement with real human stories and diverse stories as well could really teach us a lot about our humanity. You're never, very rarely, and this was what I explored in the show that I wrote, was that you're very rarely ever going to see a show where people are just on their phones all the time, even though that would be, in some ways, arguably, potentially a more accurate picture of what the real world is like. But that's not interesting. That's not engaging. That's not really the core of what humanity is, this online world. It's something different. You can't really interact physically online. You can't give Facebook a hug. That's these sort of things are like, you can get maybe something close to them in the online world, but at the end of the day, to a certain extent, it's all artificial to a certain extent. So yeah, so with regards to the acting world, that's kind of how I got into the digital wellness world, is that for me, acting was a vessel to deeper connect with my humanity. For other people, I felt could connect to their humanity, and for us to, because we're connecting deeper to our humanity, be more mindful with regards to how we're using technology.
So beautiful. And I feel all of the synergies that are interwoven through the layers because, in a way, it's like connecting to our humanity, but also it's interesting to reflect on that acting persona and how you had these different roles. So, how when you shared in acting school, you were trained to listen and experience empathy. And I feel like with different modalities online, you can be those different roles. And with empathy, I think about how apps like Daily Aloha, my empathy meter is through the roof, and I'm anonymously connecting with someone across the world on a thought provoking question. I'm like, my heart is like with you. Whereas if I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on a different persona. It's like professional hat is on, we're talking about digital wellness, and all these different things come into play. I'm also curious your perspective with how, for example, with acting, how you play a role and you had a show and that was like your previous show. I feel like there's some similarities between how with your podcast, how that was, you know, a previous episode. So that was you then, but this is you now. And I feel like when people get to know people online, it's like, I know them so well. And it's like, well, previous them that was captured and then shared, and you just happen to be viewing it now.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's such a good point. Absolutely. Yeah, because as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, we're always evolving, we're always growing. And so who we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago is not necessarily really going to be the same of who we are now. And so, yeah, that's a really good point. It's important to always keep that in mind.
Yeah, so interesting. So, disclaimer, this is who we are right now in this moment, but the future is always changing.
Right. I could be acting right now, though, Jamie. You never know.
Is that your acting voice? Because it sounds very professional.
No, no. Actually, when I was in high school, at one of the jobs that I had, someone I worked with thought that my voice was fake. For the longest time, he thought I was just like pretending to have this voice. I'm like, no, it's it's my real voice. So yeah, in that way, you're getting the real me.
I'm so appreciative because this is real talk. There's no filter, but
Ah,
that
there we
brings up
go.
such a great point is like in the future where, if it's voice verification or something, you don't know if I'm holding up like a fake microphone that's like changing my voice into the whatever. So I hope that as we continue evolving, there are ways that we can continue this genuine real talk of like, there's no filter on the voice, on the camera, or whatever. This is us having a genuine conversation that's unedited. But, as technology is continuing to advance, I don't know if that's going to be something we can genuinely say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like a little bit what we were talking about earlier with regards to how far will humans allow ourselves to dive into the artificial? I think time will tell. I think that in a lot of ways, we're leaning into it a lot right now. So much so that I hope we don't lose our balance and fall completely into the artificial. So we'll see. I think that's always the biggest question on my mind is okay, how far are humans willing to go to be even more immersed in technology?
These are such great, deep questions, and I really appreciate our level of awareness to have these conversations and topics come to mind because, in a way, this is already out there. Like, you have Snapchat or Instagram filters that change the way your face looks, the way your voice sounds, and, you know, people identify with that. And the whole catfishing thing, it's like, but who are you? And it's like, I feel as
Yeah.
though that piece of self discovery is getting covered up more and more to the point that it's harder to have that relationship within. And I feel like that's one of the silver linings with the pandemic is it's forced many people to have that introspection that is easy to avoid. So I'm glad that we're able to bring the awareness full circle and connect back with who we really are without the filters and all the other editing.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more.
I appreciate it, and I'm so glad that we went scuba diving and went to outer space and back,
We
what
went everywhere, I tell you.
covering all the depths of the digital world. So, as we continue these conversations across our different platforms, what's the best way for people to follow your journey?
Yes, I highly recommend checking out my website, which is patrick-mcandrew.com. It's important to have that dash in there too, because there is another Patrick McAndrew out there. And that's not me. So patrick-mcandrew.com is where you could find out all the information about me and my work. You could go find Relate with Patrick McAndrew, which is my podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's on all the podcast platforms. And I'm also on Instagram as well. Not the best at Instagram for obvious reasons, but trying to get better at that. And if you want to check me out there, it's at Patrick period McAndrew.
I love it. And you are the best at it because you are being your genuine self. So I appreciate you showing up on all aspects of the internet. And we'll definitely include the direct links to all of those resources in the show notes.
Great. Sounds good, Jamie. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the show. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for diving really deep into these topics. I know it takes a lot of courage to go all the way there and back, but it's just the beginning.
Yes, yes. This is only the start.
I love it. Well, thank you again for joining and sharing your digital wellness insights. I look forward to continuing the conversation online.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, see ya. Take care.